so in Afghanistan. So we can wait and hear back from Mr. Ambassador.
Can you go ahead?
Yeah.
And once Ambassador connected,
Yes.
we can start.
So we can, once we have Mr. Ambassador back, we can hear from him. But so we can go to to our next guest. Unfortunately, we didn't hear all the speech from our ambassador. But I would like to call upon Ms. Heaterbar, who I know for many years, who has been working in Afghanistan for many years, and she was one of the biggest support to Afghan human rights in Afghanistan. Yeah, so I would like to hear we would like to hear from Ms. Heaterbar that what do you think, what could be the obligation of international community for the future of the women HRDs in Afghanistan? So floor is yours, Ms. Heaterbar. You can talk now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sorry about that. Just having a little bit of distraction in the background. So thank you so much for inviting me, Zarka, and thank you for this excellent program. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Zarka asked me to talk about the future of women human rights defenders in Afghanistan and the obligations of the international community. This is such an important topic for us to talk about right now. I want to start by reading a list of names. I'm going to read first names only for security reasons and in the interest of time. These are some of the Afghan women who are part of the ongoing hunger strike that was started in Cologne, Germany by Tamana Zarya Paryani 8 days ago. Tamana, Nizam, Lida, Nilofar, Fatima, Naira, Shireen, Wahida, Ramzia, Sabira, Marzia, Wajma, Mabuba, Shamsia, Nargis, Farida, Zainab, Zura, Wida, Rukia, Asya, Hamasa, Shakira, Hoda, Mina, Sanam, Maria, Matab, Basira, Safia, Neha, and Rohina. The demands of these protesters are to recognize that gender apartheid is happening in Afghanistan, to ban Taliban officials from traveling, not to recognize the Taliban, and to cease funding to the Taliban. How did we get here? How did we get to a situation where Afghan women are starving themselves, risking their health on the streets of a European city to try to get the world's attention? What could we have done differently? And what can we still do differently that would prevent this feeling of total abandonment that we hear again and again from these women? There's something important that we have to understand. When we help Afghan women's rights protesters, if we help them, we're not doing them a favor. We're doing ourselves a favor. We're doing ourselves a favor because we need them to keep marching and chanting and putting their bodies on the line because they are defending the rights of all of us. The women's rights protesters are the only peaceful and visible resistance to Taliban rule and to Taliban abuses. They're the only voices openly saying to the Taliban from inside Afghanistan that this is hell for women and girls, that this situation, which experts, including the Special Rapporteur, have called gender apartheid, is not what Afghan people want and is not what Afghan people will accept. Male resistance is largely invisible. Women are the face and the brains of the resistance in Afghanistan. We need these women to keep protesting because their protests are the single strongest force in stopping the world from looking away from the women's rights crisis in Afghanistan. And all of us here, if we're deeply committed to women's rights, cannot afford to have the world look away. How the world responds to what is happening in Afghanistan, to the clock on women's rights being turned back there by several centuries, has profound implications for the rights of women and girls everywhere, and for our deeply incomplete global push for gender equality. The Taliban have become role models. I recently heard a smart Afghan feminist describe them as the most successful terrorist group in the world. They bask in this role. They don't compromise on anything, and they won't, as long as they feel the glow of admiration from their ideological soulmates around the world, and as long as the international community lacks the backbone to stand up to them. The only ones with the courage to stand up to them so far are Afghan women's rights protesters. And that's why we owe them support. If we want to defend our own rights, we should help Afghan women's rights protesters. If we want to end Taliban abuses, we should help Afghan women's rights protesters. If we want misogynists everywhere to understand that the world will not tolerate systematic destruction of the rights of women and girls, and to hopefully be deterred by that understanding, we should help Afghan women's rights protesters. If we want regional stability and sustainable development in South and Central Asia, we should help Afghan women's rights protesters. And if we want a peaceful transition to a democratic and inclusive government in Afghanistan, we should help Afghan women's rights protesters. And yet, so far, it doesn't seem like we're doing much to help Afghan women's rights protesters. There are women at imminent risk of torture who need to escape Afghanistan and do not have a path to do so. There are women stranded in third countries where they are not safe and cannot resettle, who have been in limbo for years now. They cannot work and support themselves. They live in fear of deportation and arrest. Their children are out of school, and their mental health is spiraling downwards. There are moments when small amounts of emergency financial assistance could be of life and death importance, and that assistance is not available. This is part of a much larger project where the world must do better. There are so many other things to talk about accountability and justice and the Human Rights Council and the Security Council and the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice and the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty and so on. But this is one specific, relatively modest thing that we could get right, we must get right, and we're not getting it right. We can do better and we must do better. A starting point could be one or more countries, perhaps some of the countries here today, deciding that one modest but incredibly important thing they will do is help Afghan women's rights protesters. Thank you.
Thank you so much.